What's an unsolved mystery that has always haunted you? Story 1. One question has haunted investigators, aviation experts, and millions of people around the world for more than a decade. What really happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370? On the night of March 8, 2014, everything appeared routine. The Boeing 777, carrying 239 passengers and crew, departed from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, bound for Beijing, China. The weather was calm, the aircraft was considered one of the safest in the world, and there was no indication that anything was about to go wrong. For the first 40 minutes of the flight, all communications proceeded normally. The pilots exchanged routine messages with air traffic control as the aircraft cruised high above the South China Sea. Then, at 1:19 a.m., one of the pilots delivered a final transmission. Good night. Malaysian 370. Nothing about those words seemed unusual, but they would become some of the most analyzed words in aviation history. Less than 2 minutes later, the aircraft's transponder suddenly stopped transmitting. Flight 370 vanished from civilian radar screens without issuing a distress call, reporting a mechanical failure, or signaling any emergency. It was as if the aircraft had simply disappeared into the darkness. As confusion spread among air traffic controllers, military radar data revealed something even stranger. Rather than continuing toward Beijing, the aircraft had apparently turned around and flown back across Malaysia before heading out over the vast Indian Ocean. Then, it vanished completely. No crash site, no wreckage field, no explanation. Despite one of the largest and most expensive search operations ever conducted, the fate of Flight 370 remained hidden beneath thousands of miles of ocean, and with every passing year, the mystery only seemed to deepen. Story 2. Sometimes, the strangest mysteries aren't found in classified government files or unsolved criminal cases. They're hidden in ordinary moments that seem completely out of place. About 15 years ago, a passenger sat aboard a train waiting to depart from a crowded station. It was an entirely normal day. Commuters moved up and down the platform, people hurried to catch connections, and the usual noise of station announcements echoed through the air. Among the crowd stood a man beside a briefcase resting on the ground. Nothing about him seemed unusual. Then something happened that would leave a witness puzzled for years. Another man approached, carrying a briefcase of his own. Without saying a word, he stopped next to the first man. He placed his own briefcase on the platform, casually picked up the other man's briefcase, and walked away. The first man didn't react. There was no argument, no attempt to stop him, no visible conversation, no sign that anything had gone wrong. To anyone watching, it looked as though two strangers had silently exchanged briefcases in the middle of a busy train station. The witness considered reporting it. After all, it appeared suspicious. But suspicion wasn't enough. No crime had been observed. No one seemed distressed. Nothing had actually happened that could be reported. So the train eventually departed, and the mystery was left behind on the platform. Was it an innocent exchange between coworkers? A prearranged business handoff? Friends transferring important documents? Or was it something far more unusual, a covert exchange conducted in plain sight? 15 years later, the answer remains unknown. And perhaps that's what makes the story so fascinating. Sometimes the most intriguing mysteries are the ones that never leave a single clue behind. Story 3. In this mystery, investigators faced a question that remains unanswered to this day. Who were the women who checked into Oslo hotels under false identities, erased nearly every trace of their pasts, and died without revealing who they truly were? The first case emerged in the 1970s. A woman arrived in Norway, traveling under a series of different names and identities. Witnesses would later describe her as elegant, well-spoken, and remarkably secretive. She moved frequently between hotels, carrying multiple passports and carefully avoiding drawing attention to herself. When authorities examined her belongings after her death, they discovered something deeply unsettling. Labels had been removed from her clothing. Personal documents were missing. Even the smallest clues that might reveal where she had come from, appeared to have been deliberately erased. Then came another case, decades later. In 1995, a woman checked into Oslo's famous luxury hotel, the Oslo Plaza Hotel. She registered under a false name, provided misleading information about her nationality, and paid in cash. Staff noticed that she seemed cautious and private, but nothing about her behavior suggested what would happen next. A few days later, she was found dead inside her room. Once again, investigators encountered a wall of mysteries. Clothing labels had been removed. Her identity documents led nowhere. The information she had provided to hotel staff was false. Despite an extensive investigation, police were unable to determine with certainty who she was or why she had come to Norway. The similarities between the two cases were impossible to ignore. Two women, two false identities, two hotel rooms, almost no traceable past, and deaths surrounded by unanswered questions. Were they connected to intelligence agencies? Were they fugitives trying to disappear? Or were they simply people carrying secrets so profound that they chose to take them to the grave? Decades later, investigators still don't know. And perhaps the most unsettling part of the mystery is that somewhere, someone almost certainly knew exactly who these women were, but that knowledge vanished with them. Story 4. Did the men who escaped from Alcatraz actually make it to freedom, or did they vanish beneath the icy waters of San Francisco Bay? On the night of June 11, 1962, 3 inmates brothers John and Clarence Anglin, along with Frank Morris, attempted what many believed was impossible. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary sat on an isolated island surrounded by strong currents, freezing water, and constant surveillance. Prison officials considered it escape-proof. Yet somehow, the 3 men disappeared. Using crude tools fashioned from stolen spoons and a homemade drill, they spent months widening ventilation shafts hidden behind their cells. To avoid detection, they created lifelike dummy heads from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair collected from the prison barbershop. When guards made their nightly rounds, the decoys appeared to be sleeping peacefully in bed. By the time the deception was discovered the next morning, the inmates were gone. The FBI spent 17 years investigating the escape. Pieces of a homemade raft and a few personal belongings were recovered from the bay, leading authorities to conclude that the men had likely drowned during the crossing. But there was one problem. No bodies were ever found. Over the decades, strange clues continued to surface. Family members claimed to receive anonymous flowers. Witnesses reported seeing the Anglin brothers years later. Then, in 2013, a letter surfaced allegedly written by John Anglin himself, claiming that all 3 men had survived the escape. To this day, no definitive proof exists that they drowned. And just as importantly, no definitive proof exists that they survived. The only thing investigators know for certain is that 3 men vanished from the most secure prison in America and were never seen again. Story 5. What really happened to Amelia Earhart? By 1937, Amelia Earhart was already one of the most famous people on Earth. She had shattered aviation records, become a global celebrity, and inspired millions with her daring flights. But her greatest challenge was still ahead of her, becoming the first woman to fly around the world. On June 1, 1937, Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, departed on the final stages of their ambitious journey. After covering more than 22,000 miles, only a small portion of the trip remained. Their next destination was tiny Howland Island, a speck of land in the vast Pacific Ocean. Finding it would be like locating a single grain of sand in an ocean. On July 2nd, radio operators received increasingly desperate messages from Earhart's aircraft. She reported that fuel was running low and that she was unable to locate the island. Her final transmissions suggested that she and Noonan were flying back and forth along a navigation line, searching desperately for land. Then, the radio went silent. Despite one of the largest search operations in history, no trace of the aircraft was found. Yet one theory refuses to disappear. Some researchers believe Earhart and Noonan never crashed into the ocean. Instead, they may have reached a remote coral island hundreds of miles away. Over the years, investigators have uncovered intriguing clues there, possible distress calls, old artifacts, and even human remains that some believe could be connected to the missing aviators. But none of the evidence has provided the one thing historians need: proof. Until wreckage is discovered or definitive evidence emerges, Amelia Earhart's fate remains suspended between history and legend, a mystery that may be one discovery away from being solved. Story 6. How did a man hijack an airliner, parachute into the darkness with a fortune in cash, and seemingly vanish without a trace? On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a neatly dressed man boarded a flight from Portland to Seattle. He purchased his ticket under the name Dan Cooper, though history would remember him as DB. Cooper, due to a reporting error that somehow stuck. Nothing about him appeared unusual. He wore a business suit, carried a briefcase, and blended in with the other passengers. But shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to a flight attendant. At first, she assumed it was a phone number. Instead, it contained a chilling message. He claimed to have a bomb. When authorities met the aircraft in Seattle, Cooper's demands were granted. He received $200,000 in cash, worth well over $1 million today, and 4 parachutes. After releasing the passengers, he ordered the plane back into the air. Then came the impossible part. Somewhere over the dark wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, in freezing weather and high winds, Cooper lowered the aircraft's rear staircase and jumped into the night carrying the ransom money. No one saw him land. Despite one of the largest manhunts in FBI history, no body, parachute, or confirmed remains were ever found. Years later, a child discovered several decaying bundles of Cooper's ransom money buried along the banks of a river, hundreds of miles from where investigators expected them to be. And that only deepened the mystery. Did Cooper die the moment he jumped? Did he survive and quietly live out the rest of his life under a different identity? Or was he far more prepared than anyone realized? More than half a century later, nobody knows. The only thing investigators can say with certainty is that a man boarded a plane as D.B. Cooper and then disappeared into legend. Story 7. In this mystery, the question isn't who committed a murder or pulled off a daring escape. It's far simpler and somehow far more unsettling. Who was watching 657 Boulevard? In 2014, a family purchased what seemed like their dream home in the quiet town of Westfield, New Jersey. The large 6-bedroom house at 657 Boulevard was located in an affluent neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and peaceful atmosphere. It appeared to be the perfect place to raise a family. Then the letters started arriving. The first letter was addressed to the new owners shortly after they acquired the property. Its author claimed to have been watching the house for years. They referred to themselves only as the Watcher. At first, the letter seemed strange but harmless. Then the messages became increasingly disturbing. The writer appeared to know details about the family, including information that wasn't publicly available. They asked whether the children had discovered the secrets hidden within the walls of the house. They spoke about previous generations who had supposedly watched over the property and suggested that it was now their turn. The family was horrified. Police were notified, private investigators were hired, and neighbors became subjects of suspicion. Handwriting experts, forensic analysts, and law enforcement all attempted to identify the mysterious author. But every lead ended in frustration. No one could determine with certainty who had written the letters. No arrests were made. No definitive explanation emerged. As the years passed, theories multiplied. Was it a neighbor obsessed with the property? An elaborate prank? A disgruntled resident trying to drive down property values? Or someone far more sinister? To this day, nobody knows. The letters stopped being a mystery on paper and became something much stranger. A reminder that sometimes the most frightening threats are the ones that never reveal themselves. Somewhere, perhaps, the Watcher still knows the truth. Story 8. What caused a deadly train crash? It's whether a bizarre television broadcast that appeared days earlier was nothing more than an unfortunate coincidence or something far stranger. On September 27, 2016, viewers watching a television station in the New York area witnessed something deeply unusual. Without warning, normal programming was interrupted by what appeared to be an emergency alert test. But unlike a standard alert, the screen displayed a cryptic message. Would you? Could you? On a train? The phrase seemed random, almost nonsensical. Some viewers immediately recognized it as a line from the children's book Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. Others found it unsettling. Why would such a strange sentence appear during what looked like an emergency broadcast? The station later explained that the message was the result of a technical error involving a test alert. Officials stated that it had never been intended for public viewing and denied any deeper meaning behind the incident. Then, 2 days later, tragedy struck. On the morning of September 29, a commuter train failed to stop as it entered Hoboken Terminal. The train slammed into the station at high speed, causing extensive damage. One person was ended, and more than 100 others were injured. In the aftermath, some people remembered the strange broadcast. A message mentioning a train had appeared just 48 hours before a devastating train crash. Investigators found no evidence linking the alert to the accident. The crash was ultimately attributed to human factors, and officials maintained that the television interruption was merely an unrelated technical malfunction. Yet for many observers, the timing remains difficult to ignore. Was it simply a bizarre coincidence amplified by hindsight? A forgotten test message that happened to contain an unfortunate phrase? Or is there still an unknown explanation behind one of the strangest broadcasting incidents ever associated with a real-world tragedy? To this day, no one has fully explained why that particular message appeared, or why it surfaced just before disaster struck. Story 9. Who was Jack the Ripper? The year was 1888. In the impoverished streets of Whitechapel, a district in London's East End, fear began to spread through the narrow alleyways and crowded tenements. One by one, women were found brutally murdered under circumstances so shocking that newspapers across the world seized upon the story. The assassin seemed to appear out of nowhere. His victims were often targeted at night, and the attacks displayed a level of violence that horrified even experienced police officers. Yet despite the growing panic and the enormous public attention, the murderer left behind remarkably little evidence. No fingerprints, no photographs, no eyewitnesses could provide a reliable identification. Only questions. As the endings continued, letters allegedly written by the murderer began arriving at newspapers and police stations. One of them was signed with a name that would become infamous throughout history: Jack the Ripper. Whether the assassin actually wrote the letters remains uncertain, but the name endured. Police investigated countless suspects: doctors, butchers, sailors, criminals, aristocrats, and even members of the royal family were dragged into speculation. Over the decades, historians and detectives have proposed dozens of theories, each claiming to have finally identified the assassin. Yet none have provided definitive proof. Part of what makes the mystery so enduring is that it sits at the crossroads of history and uncertainty. The crimes occurred before modern forensic science existed. DNA analysis, surveillance cameras, and criminal databases were still decades away. If the murders happened today, the case might have been solved within weeks. Instead, more than 130 years later, Jack the Ripper remains a ghost hidden within the historical record. A name known around the world. A series of crimes that changed criminal investigation forever. And an identity that may have vanished into history the moment the ending stopped. Story 10. On November 22, 1963, the world watched in shock as John F. Kennedy was assassinated. While riding through Dallas, Texas within hours, police arrested a former Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald. Investigators concluded that Oswald had fired the fatal shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. For many people, that should have been the end of the story. Instead, it was only the beginning. Oswald's life was a maze of contradictions. He defected to the Soviet Union during the Cold War, only to return to the United States a few years later. He expressed strong political opinions, struggled to maintain stable employment, and often seemed dissatisfied with his place in the world. Friends and acquaintances described him as intelligent, but deeply troubled. Yet none of that fully explains why he would target the President of the United States. Was it a political ideology, a desire for fame, personal frustration, an attempt to make himself important in history? The most frustrating part is that we may never know. Just 2 days after Kennedy's assassination, Oswald himself was shot and ended by nightclub owner Jack Ruby while being transferred between jails. Millions watched the shooting on live television. With Oswald dead, investigators lost the one person who might have provided a definitive answer. That vacuum created decades of speculation. Some suspected the CIA. Others pointed to the Mafia, Cuba, the Soviet Union, or hidden conspiracies operating behind the scenes. Entire books, documentaries, and investigations have been devoted to exploring possibilities beyond the official story. But after all these years, one mystery remains larger than all the others. Not whether Oswald fired the shots, but what was going through his mind when he decided to do it. Because while history may know the name of the assassin, the motive behind one of the most consequential murders of the 20th century remains frustratingly out of reach. Story 11. In this mystery, the question isn't who committed a crime or disappeared without a trace. It's who quietly created a technology that changed the world and then vanished. In October 2008, as the global financial system was reeling from one of the worst economic crises in modern history, an unknown individual using the name Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page document online. The paper described a revolutionary idea, a decentralized digital currency that could operate without banks, governments, or any central authority. The concept would become known as Bitcoin. At first, almost nobody paid attention. But over the following years, Satoshi worked closely with a small community of programmers, refining the software and helping launch what would eventually become the world's first successful cryptocurrency. Through emails and forum posts, Satoshi appeared thoughtful, highly intelligent, and deeply knowledgeable about cryptography, economics, and computer science. Yet nobody knew who they really were. Then, in 2011, something extraordinary happened. Satoshi stopped communicating. No farewell announcement, no press conference, no explanation. The messages simply ended, and the creator of Bitcoin disappeared. What makes the mystery even stranger is what's believed to have been left behind. Wallets associated with Satoshi contain roughly 1 million Bitcoins, a fortune worth tens of billions of dollars. Despite becoming one of the wealthiest individuals on Earth, at least on paper those coins have remained largely untouched. Why? If Satoshi wanted fame, they walked away from it. If they wanted wealth, they never claimed it. Some believe Satoshi was a lone genius. Others suspect a group of developers working together under a single pseudonym. Over the years, countless candidates have been proposed, investigated, and dismissed. But no theory has ever been proven. And perhaps that's why the mystery endures. Somewhere in the world may be the person who created a technology that transformed finance, launched an entirely new industry, and inspired millions. Yet unlike most revolutionary figures in history, they left no confirmed photograph, no verified identity, and no clear motive. Only a name. And one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the digital age. Story 12. For more than 2 centuries, treasure hunters, engineers, historians, and dreamers have been obsessed with a single location, the so-called Money Pit of Oak Island. The story begins in the late 1700s when reports emerged of a strange depression in the ground. Curious explorers began digging and allegedly uncovered layers of logs and other unusual features buried at regular intervals beneath the earth. To many, it looked as though someone had deliberately concealed something deep underground, and that possibility changed everything. Rumors quickly spread that the pit contained the lost treasure of the infamous pirate Captain Kidd. But as the years passed and excavations became more ambitious, the theories grew even more extraordinary. Some believed the island concealed priceless religious relics. Others suggested secret manuscripts lost to history. There were even claims that the jewels of Marie Antoinette had somehow found their way beneath the island. The deeper searchers dug, the stranger the mystery became. Flooded tunnels, collapsed shafts, mysterious artifacts, and conflicting discoveries fueled decades of speculation. Millions of dollars were spent trying to reach the supposed treasure, yet every major expedition seemed to encounter new obstacles before finding definitive answers. But there is another possibility. Many skeptics argue that there was never a treasure at all. They suggest that some of the island's unusual features may be natural geological formations that were misinterpreted by early treasure hunters. According to this view, generations of excavators may have unknowingly expanded a legend rather than uncovered a secret. And that's the heart of the mystery. After more than 200 years of digging, nobody has conclusively proven what lies beneath Oak Island. There may be a fortune hidden underground. There may be priceless artifacts waiting to be discovered, or there may be nothing at all. Yet the search continues, driven by the possibility that somewhere beneath the island rests a secret that has managed to outwit centuries of treasure hunters. Story 13. The real question is whether one of the world's most famous diamonds carries a curse. Today, the legendary Hope Diamond sits behind protective glass in the National Museum of Natural History, admired by millions of visitors every year. Its deep blue color is mesmerizing, almost otherworldly. But for generations, stories have followed the gem wherever it has gone. Stories of misfortune, stories of tragedy, stories of a curse. According to legend, the diamond was originally stolen from a sacred statue in India, bringing disaster upon anyone who possessed it. Over the centuries, tales began to emerge linking the stone to bankruptcies, ruined lives, mysterious deaths, and even the downfall of royalty. Among the names frequently connected to the diamond are King Louis V and Queen Marie Antoinette, both of whom met violent ends during the French Revolution. As the gem passed from owner to owner, the stories only multiplied. Some owners experienced financial collapse, others suffered unexpected tragedies. Newspapers eagerly repeated every strange coincidence, transforming the Hope Diamond into perhaps the most infamous gemstone in history. But there is a problem. Many historians believe the curse itself may be a myth. Several of the most dramatic stories surrounding the diamond cannot be verified, and some appear to have been exaggerated or even invented by jewel dealers and journalists seeking to increase public fascination with the stone. After all, a cursed diamond attracts far more attention than an ordinary one. Yet the legend refuses to die. Perhaps it's because the Hope Diamond possesses a strange power, not a supernatural one, but a psychological one. Once people learn about the curse, every accident, every tragedy, and every coincidence begins to feel connected. And that leaves us with a mystery that has endured for centuries. Is the Hope Diamond truly cursed? Or has one beautiful stone become the center of one of history's most successful legends? Either way, countless visitors have stood before it, unable to look away, wondering whether they were staring at a priceless treasure or something far more dangerous. Story 14. For generations, stories of skinwalkers have circulated throughout the American Southwest, particularly within the traditions of the Navajo. Unlike many creatures of folklore, skinwalkers are not described as monsters lurking in distant forests. Instead, they are said to be human beings who possess the ability to transform into animals or take on different forms. And according to the stories, they are not meant to be spoken about lightly. Descriptions vary, but many accounts share similar details. Witnesses report seeing strange animal-like figures moving in unnatural ways, creatures that appear far larger than they should be, or beings with eyes that seem almost human. Others tell stories of hearing voices calling their names from the darkness, mimicking the voices of family members or friends. The most unsettling part? Many people claim that skinwalkers can blend seamlessly into ordinary life. Over the years, countless sightings and encounters have been reported. Travelers have described being followed by mysterious figures along remote desert roads. Residents of isolated communities have reported hearing unexplained noises outside their homes late at night. Some insist they witnessed something impossible, something that moved like an animal but seemed to possess human intelligence. But there is no physical evidence, no verified photographs, no confirmed recordings, no scientific proof that skinwalkers exist. Skeptics argue that the stories are a mixture of folklore, misunderstandings, and the natural tendency of the human mind to find patterns in the unknown. They point out that fear can transform an ordinary experience into something extraordinary. Yet the legends persist, passed down through generations, whispered rather than openly discussed. And whether skinwalkers are supernatural beings, misunderstood folklore, or something else entirely, one thing is certain: few mysteries inspire as much fear simply from being mentioned. Story 15. The story began in the late 1980s. In the small town of Horicon, Wisconsin, the Tallman family had recently purchased what appeared to be an unremarkable home. There was nothing sinister about the property, no local legends, no notorious crimes, no reason to suspect that anything unusual lurked within its walls. Then, the disturbances began. At first, they were easy to dismiss. Household objects would appear in places where nobody remembered leaving them. Small items vanished only to reappear later. The family assumed they were simply being forgetful. But the activity escalated. According to witnesses, furniture began moving on its own. Glasses shattered without warning. Heavy objects were reportedly thrown across rooms by an unseen force. Family members claimed they could hear footsteps moving through empty hallways late at night. The most famous incident involved a bottle of holy water. The family alleged that it suddenly exploded with tremendous force, sending shards of glass flying through the room. Some witnesses claimed fragments embedded themselves into nearby walls. As news spread, paranormal investigators and journalists arrived, hoping to uncover a natural explanation. None found definitive proof of paranormal activity. Skeptics suggested exaggeration, misinterpretation, or even an elaborate hoax. Others argued that too many witnesses had reported strange events for the entire story to be fabricated. Decades later, the Tallman house remains a source of debate. Was it a genuine case of poltergeist activity, or a mystery created by fear, coincidence, and the power of belief? No one has ever conclusively answered that question. Story 16. The Harden House. The question is why so many visitors described experiencing the same terrifying phenomena. The house itself appeared perfectly normal. It stood quietly among other homes, giving little indication that it would one day become associated with one of the region's most persistent haunting legends. For the family living there, the first sign seemed insignificant. Unexplained noises echoed through the building late at night. Doors occasionally opened on their own. Footsteps could allegedly be heard moving through upstairs rooms when nobody was present. At first, these incidents were dismissed as the sounds of an aging house. Then, things became harder to explain. Family members claimed to see dark figures standing in hallways, before vanishing moments later. Some reported waking during the night, with the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching them. Visitors who knew nothing about the house's reputation allegedly described experiencing similar sensations. As stories spread throughout the community, curiosity turned into fascination. Paranormal investigators arrived carrying cameras, audio equipment, and electromagnetic sensors. Overnight vigils were conducted. Witness statements were collected. Strange sounds and unexplained anomalies were occasionally recorded, but none provided undeniable proof that the house was haunted. Skeptics argued that expectation and suggestion influenced people's experiences. Once a location acquires a reputation, every creak and shadow can begin to feel sinister. Yet believers point to the consistency of the reports. Many of the people who described encounters had never met one another. To this day, no definitive explanation exists. Whether the Harden house was home to something supernatural or simply became the center of a powerful local legend remains unknown. And perhaps that's exactly why the mystery refuses to die. Story 17. The story begins in Texas during the 1980s, when a growing residential development appeared to be just another quiet suburban neighborhood. Families moved in, expecting peaceful lives, unaware that the land concealed a forgotten piece of local history. Then strange events began to unfold. Several residents reported a series of misfortunes that seemed unusually severe. Sudden illnesses, financial hardships, accidents, and unexplained deaths appeared to affect multiple families living within the community. At first, these incidents seemed unrelated. Then, a disturbing discovery was made. Researchers uncovered evidence that part of the neighborhood had been built over the site of an old cemetery known as Black Hope. Historical records suggested that graves once occupied portions of the land long before developers arrived. For many residents, the revelation changed everything. Stories quickly spread that construction crews had disturbed burial sites. Soon reports of paranormal activity began emerging. Witnesses described ghostly figures appearing near homes. Others claimed to see strange lights hovering above the ground at night. Some residents reported hearing unexplained sounds or experiencing an overwhelming feeling of unease inside their houses. As media attention grew, Black Hope became known across the country as a supposedly cursed neighborhood. Skeptics pointed out that tragedies occur in every community and that people often search for patterns during difficult times. They argued that once the cemetery was discovered, ordinary events were reinterpreted through the lens of a haunting. Believers disagreed. To them, the timing was too perfect. Decades later, Black Hope remains one of America's most fascinating cemetery mysteries, a place where history, tragedy, and legend became impossible to separate. Story 18. On the night of February 21, 1977, a respiratory therapist named Teresita Bassa was found dead in her Chicago apartment. Her body had been stabbed, and the apartment had been set on fire in what appeared to be an attempt to destroy evidence. Investigators quickly discovered that several pieces of jewelry were missing, but beyond that, they had almost nothing. No eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, no obvious suspects. The case soon went cold. Then something extraordinary happened. A co-worker of Bassa's named Remy Chua claimed that her husband had begun acting strangely. According to her, he would enter trance-like states and speak in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. During these episodes, he allegedly claimed to be channeling the spirit of Teresita Bassa. The messages were startling. The voice identified a man named Alan Showery as the assassin and claimed he had stolen Bassa's jewelry after murdering her. Police were skeptical, but with no other leads, detectives decided to investigate. To their surprise, they discovered that Showery had indeed known Bassa. Even more astonishingly, several of the victim's missing pieces of jewelry were allegedly found in the possession of his girlfriend. Confronted with the evidence, Showery eventually confessed. To this day, investigators maintain that the case was solved through traditional detective work. Yet one unsettling question remains. If the information truly came from a spirit, how did it know details that police themselves had not yet uncovered? That's the mystery that keeps the story alive. Story 19. Standing alone in the darkness. The house appeared like countless other old homes scattered throughout rural America. By day it seemed harmless. By night, it became the center of increasingly disturbing stories. Witnesses claimed to hear footsteps crossing empty rooms. Doors reportedly opened and slammed shut on their own. Some visitors described seeing figures standing at the end of hallways, only for them to disappear when approached. Others reported hearing whispers coming from rooms that nobody occupied. As the stories spread, paranormal investigators began visiting the property. Armed with cameras, audio recorders, and motion sensors, they hoped to document whatever was happening inside. Several teams claimed to capture strange sounds and unexplained anomalies. Yet none of the evidence proved anything conclusively. Skeptics argued that old houses naturally produce noises caused by settling foundations, shifting temperatures, and aging materials. Once people expect a haunting, they become far more likely to interpret ordinary events as paranormal. Believers disagreed. They pointed to the consistency of the reports. Many witnesses described remarkably similar experiences, despite having no connection to one another. The mystery deepened as more stories emerged. Was the Jones house genuinely haunted? Was it the product of suggestion and imagination? Or had decades of rumors transformed an ordinary home into something far more frightening? To this day, nobody knows. But for those who claim to have spent a night inside, the uncertainty is often the most terrifying part. Story 20. For years, drivers traveling along isolated stretches of Highway 50 reported encounters with a mysterious woman who seemed to appear from nowhere. Most descriptions were eerily similar. Late at night, motorists would spot a lone female figure standing near the roadside. She often appeared distressed, as though she needed help. Some drivers stopped and offered assistance. That's when things became strange. According to numerous accounts, the woman would either vanish moments later or disappear entirely before reaching her destination. Some witnesses claim she entered their vehicles only to fade away without explanation. Others insisted she led them toward locations connected to tragic accidents or deaths. As stories spread, local residents began referring to the figure as the Highway 50 Phantom. Investigators attempted to separate fact from fiction. No evidence of a real woman matching the descriptions was ever found. No missing person reports explained the sightings, yet reports continued arriving from people who had never heard the legend before experiencing it themselves. Skeptics believe the phenomenon can be explained through fatigue, poor visibility, and the psychological effects of driving alone at night. After all, lonely roads have a way of playing tricks on the human mind. But believers point to the remarkable consistency between independent accounts. How could so many people describe the same encounter? To this day, no one knows. Whether the Highway 50 Phantom is a ghost, an urban legend, or simply a product of human perception, she remains one of the most enduring roadside mysteries in America. Story 21. The story centers around a young mother and her daughter who lived in what appeared to be an ordinary apartment. To neighbors, they were just another family trying to build a life. Nothing about the apartment suggested it would one day become the subject of chilling paranormal rumors. Then, tragedy struck. Following a devastating event involving one of the apartment's occupants, strange reports began to emerge from people who later lived in or visited the unit. Some claimed to hear footsteps moving through empty rooms. Others reported hearing a woman's voice when nobody else was present. Several witnesses described a feeling of being watched, particularly late at night. Some even claimed to see fleeting figures standing in doorways before disappearing moments later. As stories spread, Apartment 14 gained a reputation. New residents sometimes arrived unaware of the apartment's history, yet a surprising number allegedly reported unusual experiences before learning anything about the tragic events connected to the property. Skeptics argue that knowledge of a tragedy can dramatically influence how people interpret ordinary sounds and sensations. Apartment buildings naturally produce noises from plumbing, neighbors, and settling structures. But believers point to the recurring nature of the reports. Why did so many people describe similar experiences? Was Apartment 14 truly haunted by the memory of a terrible event? Or were residents unknowingly influenced by a story that had taken on a life of its own? Years later, the mystery remains unresolved, and for some who lived there, the apartment never truly felt empty. Story 22. Nestled in an isolated setting, Lou's cottage appears charming at first glance. Its architecture is picturesque, almost storybook-like. Yet for decades, visitors have associated the property with strange and unsettling experiences. The reports vary. Some visitors claim they heard unexplained footsteps moving through rooms above them when nobody else was present. Others reported doors opening and closing on their own, or hearing voices echoing through the house late at night. A number of witnesses described seeing shadowy figures standing motionless in hallways before vanishing. What makes the story particularly intriguing is that many visitors allegedly had no prior knowledge of the cottage's reputation. As accounts accumulated, paranormal investigators became interested. Numerous overnight investigations were conducted. Audio recordings captured strange sounds. Photographs occasionally revealed unusual anomalies. Yet none of the evidence provided definitive proof of supernatural activity. Skeptics argue that old buildings are naturally prone to unusual noises, drafts, and visual illusions. They believe that expectation can transform ordinary experiences into seemingly paranormal encounters. Believers see it differently. They point to the sheer number of reports spanning multiple decades. If every witness was mistaken, why were their stories often so similar? To this day, Lou's Cottage remains one of those places where certainty is impossible. Perhaps it is simply an old house surrounded by ghost stories. Or perhaps something else lingers within its walls. Whatever the truth may be, visitors continue to leave with more questions than answers. And that's often the hallmark of the most enduring mysteries. Story 23. The story begins in early 19th century Tennessee, where farmer John Bell and his family reported a series of increasingly disturbing events. At first, the occurrences seemed harmless. Knocking sounds echoed through the house at night. Strange scratching noises came from inside walls. Unexplained footsteps could be heard moving through empty rooms. Then, the activity escalated. Family members claimed blankets were pulled from beds while they slept. Objects moved without explanation. Some witnesses even reported hearing a disembodied voice speaking throughout the house. The entity eventually became known as the Bell Witch. According to legend, the voice possessed knowledge it should not have had. It allegedly carried conversations with visitors, recited information from distant locations, and appeared to target certain members of the Bell family more aggressively than others. News of the haunting spread rapidly. People traveled from miles away, hoping to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Among those rumored to have investigated the case was future U.S. President Andrew Jackson. Whether that encounter truly occurred remains debated. More than 2 centuries later, historians remain divided. Some believe the events were exaggerated over time, transformed into folklore through repeated retellings. Others argue that too many witnesses reported strange experiences to dismiss the story entirely. Whatever happened on the Bell farm, it became one of America's most famous paranormal legends. And to this day, nobody has definitively explained the voice that supposedly terrorized a Tennessee family for years. Story 24. Located in a quiet area far removed from the noise of major cities, the man house appears ordinary during daylight hours. But over the years, it developed a reputation that drew paranormal investigators, curious visitors, and ghost hunters from across the country. According to local stories, the house was connected to a series of tragic events involving former occupants. As the legend grew, so did reports of unexplained activity. Visitors claimed to hear footsteps moving through empty rooms. Others reported doors opening and closing without explanation. Some described cold spots that seemed to appear suddenly before disappearing moments later. More disturbing were the alleged sightings. Witnesses claimed to see shadowy figures standing motionless in hallways or staring from upper windows. Several reported feeling an overwhelming sense of unease, as though they were not alone inside the building. Over the years, numerous paranormal teams investigated the property. Audio recordings allegedly captured strange sounds, while photographs occasionally revealed anomalies that believers interpreted as evidence of supernatural activity. Yet none of it proved anything conclusively. Skeptics argue that old houses naturally produce unusual sounds and that expectation can heavily influence perception. Believers disagree. They point to the consistency of reports from visitors who had never met each other. To this day, nobody can definitively explain what people experienced inside the man house. And perhaps that's why the legend continues to grow. Story 25. In this mystery, the question isn't whether the lights exist. Thousands of people have seen them. The real question is what they are. For more than a century, mysterious glowing orbs have been reported near the small town of Marfa, Texas. Witnesses describe strange lights appearing after dark on the distant horizon. Sometimes they remain stationary. Other times they move rapidly, split into multiple lights, merge together, or vanish without warning. The phenomenon has become known as the Marfa lights. Reports date back to the 19th century, long before modern highways. Automobile headlights or advanced electrical infrastructure could easily explain them. Ranchers, Travelers, military personnel, and scientists have all claimed to witness the lights. Naturally, theories emerged. Some researchers believe the lights are caused by atmospheric conditions that refract distant vehicle headlights. Others suggest they may result from unusual geological activity, electrical phenomena, or temperature inversions. But none of those explanations account for every reported sighting. Witnesses continue to describe behaviors that seem difficult to reconcile with conventional explanations. The mystery became so famous that observation areas were eventually established specifically for people hoping to catch a glimpse of the phenomenon, and many do. To this day, the lights continue appearing in the Texas desert. Scientists remain divided, visitors remain fascinated, and somewhere in the darkness beyond Marfa, glowing lights continue to dance across the horizon, refusing to reveal exactly what they are. Story 26: How Margaret Wilson Died. History records that. The mystery is whether her voice still echoes across the shoreline where she met her fate. The story dates back to 17th century Scotland during a period of intense religious conflict. Margaret Wilson, a young woman who refused to abandon her beliefs, was sentenced to death by drowning. According to historical accounts, she was tied to a stake in the tidal flats near the coast and left to face the incoming sea. Witnesses claimed she remained calm as the water rose around her. Her death transformed her into a symbol of faith and resistance. But over the centuries, a strange legend emerged. Visitors to the area began reporting unusual experiences near the site associated with her execution. Some claimed to hear a young woman singing when nobody was present. Others described hearing faint voices carried by the wind across the shoreline. A few even reported seeing an indistinct figure standing near the water before disappearing moments later. Skeptics point out that coastal environments can create strange acoustic effects. Wind, waves, and shifting weather conditions often produce sounds that seem almost human. Yet the stories persisted, generation after generation. Today, Margaret Wilson's tragic death remains a documented historical event. But whether the haunting stories connected to her are folklore or something more remains an enduring mystery. Story 27. Perched along California's rugged coastline, the Moss Beach Distillery has long been associated with one of America's most famous hauntings. According to local legend, a young woman regularly visited the property during the Prohibition era. She was said to be involved in a secret romance that ended in tragedy when she was murdered near the shoreline. Soon afterward, reports of strange encounters began. Employees claimed objects moved without explanation. Customers reported seeing a woman dressed in blue walking through the building before suddenly vanishing. Some described feeling an unseen presence brush past them. Others claimed mirrors reflected figures that weren't actually there. As the story spread, paranormal investigators arrived hoping to uncover evidence. Photographs, recordings, and witness testimony fueled the legend. But none of the evidence provided definitive proof. Skeptics suggest the haunting is little more than a compelling local story reinforced by decades of publicity. Believers point to the large number of independent reports spanning generations. Today, the Blue Lady remains inseparable from the history of the distillery. Whether she is a ghost, a legend, or something in between, nobody has managed to solve the mystery, and visitors continue arriving, hoping for a glimpse of California's most famous spectral resident. Story 28, located in Louisiana, the plantation's history stretches back more than 2 centuries. Over time, stories of tragedy, death, and unexplained events became attached to the property. The most famous legend involves a woman known as Chloe. According to popular accounts, Chloe was an enslaved woman who became entangled in a series of events that allegedly led to poisoning and death within the household. Although historians dispute many aspects of the story, it became deeply woven into the plantation's folklore. Then came the sightings. Visitors reported seeing figures standing in windows. Photographs occasionally appeared to show unexplained faces. Witnesses described hearing footsteps in empty rooms and voices coming from vacant hallways. Some guests claimed beds shook during the night. Others reported seeing apparitions dressed in historical clothing wandering through the property. Paranormal investigators have spent decades examining the plantation, yet no investigation has produced undeniable proof of supernatural activity. Skeptics argue that Myrtle's plantation's reputation encourages visitors to interpret ordinary events as paranormal. Believers point to the sheer volume of reports collected over many years. Whatever the explanation, the plantation has become one of the most famous haunted locations in America. And after 2 centuries of stories, its mysteries show no signs of disappearing. Story 29. Long before modern cruise ships dominated the waterways, one vessel became the source of countless ghost stories drifting along America's rivers. The Delta Queen first launched in 1927 and quickly became one of the most famous steamboats in the United States. Over the decades, thousands of passengers traveled aboard the vessel as it navigated the Mississippi River and its tributaries. But according to many, some passengers never truly left. Crew members and guests have reported unexplained encounters aboard the riverboat for generations. The most famous spirit is said to be a woman known as Mary Green, a passenger who allegedly spent much of her life traveling aboard the Delta Queen. Witnesses claim they have seen her wandering the hallways late at night. Others describe hearing footsteps echoing across empty decks or doors opening and closing without explanation. Some guests have even reported waking during the night to find an unknown woman standing in their cabin before she vanished moments later. As the stories spread, paranormal investigators began visiting the vessel in hopes of documenting the phenomena. Yet, like many famous hauntings, definitive proof remains elusive. Skeptics argue that old ships naturally produce strange sounds as wood expands, contracts, and shifts with temperature changes. Long corridors, dim lighting, and the isolation of river travel may also contribute to unusual experiences. Believers aren't convinced. They point to decades of remarkably similar reports from passengers who had never met one another. Whether the Delta Queen is haunted or not, one thing is certain. Its legend continues to drift through American folklore like a ghostly passenger refusing to disembark. Story 30. Some places become historic landmarks. Others become mysteries. Located in Los Angeles, California, Drum Barracks served as a Union military headquarters during the American Civil War. Thousands of soldiers passed through the site, and over time, the barracks became one of the most important military installations in the western United States. Today, however, many visitors come for a different reason. Reports of paranormal activity have surrounded the building for decades. Museum staff, volunteers, and visitors have described hearing footsteps moving through empty rooms after closing hours. Some claim to hear voices carrying on conversations where nobody is present. Others report seeing figures dressed in 19th century military uniforms standing in hallways before suddenly disappearing. Several witnesses have even described feeling an unseen presence nearby while exploring the property. As stories accumulated, paranormal investigators began conducting overnight examinations of the barracks. Strange sounds were recorded. Unusual photographs were captured. Yet none of the evidence provided undeniable proof. Historians point out that old buildings often inspire ghost stories because visitors become emotionally connected to the events that occurred there. In a location associated with war and loss, it's easy to understand why legends develop. Still, the reports continue. More than a century after soldiers last occupied the barracks, visitors continue to describe experiences they cannot explain. Whether the phenomena are paranormal or psychological, Drum Barracks remains one of California's most enduring haunted locations. Story 31. Few places in America carry as much history or as many ghost stories as Gettysburg. In July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg became the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. Over 3 days, tens of thousands of soldiers were ended, wounded, or went missing. The battlefield was transformed into a landscape of unimaginable devastation. More than 160 years later, some believe echoes of that tragedy still remain. Visitors to Gettysburg National Military Park have reported strange experiences for generations. Witnesses claim to hear distant cannon fire on quiet nights, despite there being no reenactments taking place. Others describe hearing marching footsteps or voices drifting across empty fields. Some visitors report seeing figures dressed in Civil War uniforms standing among the trees before vanishing moments later. Even park employees and historians have occasionally shared stories of encounters they struggled to explain. Naturally, skeptics offer alternative explanations. Gettysburg attracts millions of visitors who arrive expecting paranormal experiences. Human perception is highly influenced by suggestion, especially in places connected to emotional historical events. Yet, the reports continue. Year after year, decade after decade. Whether the stories are the result of psychology, folklore, or something more mysterious, Gettysburg occupies a unique place in American culture. A place where history feels unusually close, and where some visitors leave wondering whether they witnessed more than just the past. Story 32. For over a century, a mysterious light has appeared along an abandoned railroad track in Arkansas, and nobody can fully explain it. Known as the Gurdon Light, the phenomenon is described as a glowing orb that appears after dark near the town of Gurdon. Witnesses claim the light hovers above the old railway line before moving silently through the darkness. Sometimes it appears white, sometimes orange, occasionally blue. The stories began in the early 20th century following a violent incident involving a railroad worker. According to local legend, a railway foreman was ended near the tracks, and the mysterious light is the lantern of a worker still searching for him. It's a compelling story. But the mystery goes deeper than folklore. Scientists, journalists, and curious visitors have all observed the light. Many have attempted to determine its source. Some suggest distant vehicle headlights are being refracted by unusual atmospheric conditions. Others point to naturally occurring gases, geological activity, or optical illusions. Yet none of the explanations fully satisfy every witness. People continue to report seeing the light move in ways that seem inconsistent with conventional sources. Unlike many ghost stories, the Gurdon Light isn't merely based on old legends. The phenomenon is still being reported today, which leaves one enduring question. Is the Gurdon Light a misunderstood natural occurrence, a trick of the environment, or something stranger lurking along a forgotten stretch of railroad? More than 100 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. Story 33. Some houses gain a reputation because of their age. Others gain a reputation because of the stories people refuse to stop telling. The Kelsey house falls into the second category. For years, the property has been associated with reports of unexplained activity that many visitors claim cannot be easily dismissed. What makes the case intriguing isn't a single dramatic event, but the steady accumulation of strange experiences over time. Witnesses describe hearing footsteps moving through empty rooms. Others report doors opening on their own or lights behaving strangely despite no electrical issues being found. Several visitors have claimed to feel sudden drops in temperature while standing in specific parts of the house. Some even reported feeling as though they were being watched despite being completely alone. As the story spread, paranormal investigators began visiting the property. Audio recordings allegedly captured unexplained sounds, motion sensors occasionally activated without an obvious cause. Yet every piece of evidence seemed to raise more questions than answers. Skeptics argue that old homes naturally generate unusual noises. Aging foundations settle, pipes expand, and electrical systems create unexpected effects that can easily be mistaken for something supernatural. Believers point to the consistency of witness reports. Many people who experienced strange occurrences had no knowledge of the house's reputation beforehand. Whether the Kelsey house is genuinely haunted or simply the victim of an enduring local legend remains unknown. But for those who have spent a night there, the uncertainty is often more unsettling than any ghost story. Story 34. If walls could talk, the historic La Posada Hotel would have more stories than most. Located in New Mexico, the hotel has welcomed travelers, celebrities, railroad passengers, and tourists for generations. Its rich history has made it a beloved landmark, but some guests believe not everyone who checked in ever checked out. Over the years, employees and visitors have reported a variety of unexplained encounters throughout the hotel. Some claim to hear footsteps pacing through empty corridors late at night. Others describe hearing voices when no one else is nearby. The most famous reports involve sightings of mysterious figures. Guests have allegedly seen individuals dressed in clothing from another era standing in hallways or appearing briefly in rooms before vanishing moments later. Housekeeping staff have occasionally reported finding objects moved from their original locations without explanation. Naturally, stories like these attracted paranormal investigators. Numerous teams have visited the hotel hoping to capture evidence of a haunting. Strange sounds, unusual photographs, and witness testimony have all contributed to the hotel's reputation. Yet no investigation has produced definitive proof. Skeptics argue that old hotels naturally create ghost stories. With thousands of guests, countless memories, and a rich history, legends often become part of the experience. Still, reports continue. And whether the stories are paranormal or psychological, La Posada remains one of the Southwest's most intriguing haunted locations, a place where every guest arrives wondering who might still be wandering the halls after dark. Story 35. Every historic hotel develops legends. Few develop as much as La Posada. Beyond the reports of ghostly figures and unexplained footsteps, the hotel has become surrounded by stories that blur the line between documented history and folklore. One recurring tale involves a mysterious woman said to appear in certain sections of the building. Witnesses describe her calmly walking through hallways before disappearing around corners where no exit exists. Another legend tells of phantom conversations heard in empty rooms. Guests have reported hearing laughter, distant voices, and even music despite finding nobody nearby. Employees have shared stories of doors locking and unlocking on their own, elevators stopping on empty floors, and objects appearing in locations where they should not be. The fascinating thing about these stories is that they span decades. Different generations of staff members have reported remarkably similar experiences despite never meeting one another. Skeptics see this as evidence of folklore evolving over time. Once a story becomes part of a location's identity, new visitors may unknowingly reinforce it. Believers disagree. They argue that some reports are too specific and too consistent to be dismissed entirely. Today, the legends surrounding La Posada are almost as famous as the hotel itself. Whether they're the product of imagination, coincidence, or something genuinely unexplained remains a mystery. But they continue to ensure that every creaking floorboard and shadowy hallway feels a little more mysterious than it otherwise would. Story 37. Few mysteries have generated as much debate as the murders connected to the Lizzie Borden house. On August 4, 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were found brutally murdered inside their home in Fall River, Massachusetts. Their daughter, Lizzie Borden, was arrested and placed on trial for the endings. The case became a national sensation. Despite intense scrutiny, Lizzie was ultimately acquitted, and that's where the mystery begins. More than a century later, historians still debate what really happened inside the house that day. Some believe Lizzie was guilty and escaped conviction due to insufficient evidence. Others argue that another suspect may have been responsible. As years passed, reports of paranormal activity began to emerge from the property. Visitors claimed to hear unexplained footsteps. Some reported seeing figures moving through rooms associated with the murders. Others described sudden feelings of dread or overwhelming sadness while touring the house. Today, the building operates as both a museum and lodging establishment, allowing guests to spend the night where one of America's most famous unsolved murder mysteries unfolded. Whether the reported hauntings are real or simply the result of the home's tragic history remains unknown. But one thing is certain: the mystery surrounding Lizzie Borden survived long after the trial ended, and the house continues to attract those searching for answers that history never provided.